I spent 5 years in what everyone thought was a perfect marriage. I planned, said yes to my wife about signed divorce papers, and finally moved on. Perfect marriage. 5 years together, and I still couldn't believe how lucky I was to have her in my life. That was until last Tuesday night, when everything changed with a single sentence that hit me like a freight train. "Intimacy is off the table until you obey me," she announced, her voice eerily calm as she stood in our bedroom doorway. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of weird joke or perhaps a role-play suggestion. The ice in her eyes quickly told me otherwise. It started with something trivial. I had accepted a dinner invitation with my college friends without consulting her first. In my defense, we had never needed permission slips for basic social activities before, but apparently this crossed some invisible line I wasn't aware existed. "You're acting like I committed a crime," I said, trying to diffuse the tension. "It's just dinner with the guys." She crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame. "It's not about the dinner. It's about respecting my input and decisions that affect us both." This wasn't the first time she'd expressed displeasure over my independence, but it was the first time she'd weaponized our intimacy. Something in me snapped. The realization that our relationship had morphed into a power struggle hit me all at once. "So, you're withholding affection to control me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I prefer to think of it as setting boundaries," she replied with a slight shrug. "When you start consulting me before making plans, we can resume normal marital relations." The casual way she delivered this ultimatum made my blood run cold. I remembered her subtle disappointments when I chose to spend time with family instead of exclusively with her, the passive-aggressive comments when I pursued a hobby she didn't share, the way she'd gradually isolated me from friends she deemed bad influences, meaning anyone who encouraged me to maintain my individuality. That night I slept on the couch, not because she banished me there, but because I couldn't stand to be next to someone who thought love was a transaction. As I stared at the ceiling, memories flooded back. How she'd pull away emotionally whenever I didn't comply with her wishes. How she'd give me the silent treatment until I apologized for perceived slights. I realized, with growing horror, that this ultimatum wasn't new. It was just the first time she'd stated it explicitly. For years she'd been conditioning me to prioritize her approval above everything else, including my own needs and happiness. The next morning I went through the motions of our routine coffee, breakfast, quick kiss goodbye, all while my mind raced with questions. How had I not seen this pattern? How much of myself had I already surrendered? And most importantly, was this relationship worth saving? I called my friend to cancel the dinner plans, not because I was giving in to her demands, but because I needed time to think. Her triumphant smile when I told her I wouldn't be going out that night made my stomach turn. She mistook my retreat for surrender. "See, that wasn't so hard," she said, brushing her hand across my shoulder. "When you consider my feelings, everything works out better for both of us." I nodded absently, already formulating a plan. If she wanted to play games with our marriage, she'd soon discover I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. There's only so far you can push someone before they stop moving backward and start pushing back. Little did she know, her ultimatum hadn't cowed me into submission. It had awakened something I'd suppressed for too long, my self-respect. The table she thought she controlled was about to be flipped in ways she couldn't imagine. For the next few days I played along with her game, carefully observing her behavior through new eyes. It was like finally putting on glasses after years of squinting. Suddenly patterns I'd been blind to came into sharp focus. During dinner that evening, I casually mentioned a work project that might require weekend hours. Her reaction was immediate and revealing. "You can't possibly be considering that," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. "We always spend weekends together. That's our time. The bonus would help with our vacation fund," I countered, watching her carefully. "Money isn't everything," she replied, her voice softening into that persuasive tone I now recognized as manipulation. "What's the point of a vacation if we're too disconnected to enjoy it?" Before my awakening, I would have backed down immediately, apologized for even considering disrupting our routine. Instead, I simply nodded and changed the subject, making a mental note of how skillfully she twisted my career advancement into a betrayal of our relationship. Later that night, I went through old texts and emails between us, looking for evidence of this pattern. What I found was disturbing, a systematic campaign to isolate me from external influences, comments about my mother being too involved in our lives, subtle criticism of friends who encouraged my independence, convenient headaches whenever I planned activities she couldn't control. The following morning, I called my oldest friend, someone I hadn't spoken with in months because she had deemed him disrespectful to our marriage. "Man, I was starting to think you'd fallen off the planet," he said, genuine concern in his voice. "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Things at home have been complicated." "She finally showed her true colors, huh?" he asked, confirming my suspicions that others had seen what I'd been too close to notice. He reminded me of incidents I'd forgotten. How she'd created drama during his wedding because it took attention away from her. How she'd sabotaged a camping trip by claiming sudden illness, only to make a miraculous recovery when I canceled. That evening, emboldened by this external perspective, I decided to test the waters. I informed her, not asked, but informed, that I would be meeting my friend for lunch the following day. Her reaction was nuclear. "So this is how you respond to my concerns? By deliberately defying me?" "I'm not defying you," I said calmly. "I'm catching up with a friend. That's normal human behavior. Normal people consult their spouses before making plans," she snapped. "Consult or get permission?" I asked, finally addressing the elephant in the room. "Because those are very different things." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "If you leave this house tomorrow, don't expect anything from me for a very long time." There it was again, the threat. The leveraging of intimacy as a control mechanism. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Her power over me existed only because I valued our physical connection more than my autonomy. What would happen if I recalibrated that equation? "I think I can live with that consequence," I said, surprising both of us with my calm defiance. For a moment, panic flashed across her face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in days. She quickly recovered, her expression hardening into cold determination. "We'll see how long you last before you come crawling back," she said, turning away. "You always do." That night, lying alone in the guest room, I scrolled through photos from earlier years of our relationship. Had there been warning signs from the beginning? Had I ignored red flags because of her beauty, her charm, her ability to make me feel special when she approved of my behavior? The truth was becoming uncomfortably clear. Our entire relationship was built on an uneven power dynamic that I had unconsciously accepted. But now that I could see it, I couldn't unsee it. And with that awareness came a decision: this pattern would end, one way or another. Lunch with my friend was like coming up for air after nearly drowning. For 2 hours I spoke freely, without calculating the potential consequences of my words. No walking on eggshells, no strategic omissions to avoid disapproval, just authentic conversation. "You seem different," he observed as we finished our meals. "More like your old self." "I'm starting to remember who that person was," I admitted. When I returned home, she was waiting, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. I braced myself for the confrontation, but instead of engaging, I simply smiled and walked past her to my home office. "That's it?" she called after me. "Nothing to say for yourself?" I turned, maintaining a neutral expression. "I had lunch with a friend. It was nice. There's nothing more to discuss." Her mouth opened and closed, clearly thrown by my refusal to participate in the expected argument. This wasn't in her playbook. She needed me to either apologize or fight back. Either would confirm her control over my emotional state. Over the next week, I implemented what I privately called my silent resistance strategy. Instead of openly challenging her authority, I simply began reclaiming small pieces of my independence without fanfare or explanation. I signed up for a photography class I'd always been interested in. When she pointed out that it conflicted with the television show we usually watch together, I simply shrugged and said, "You can record it." I reconnected with colleagues for after-work gatherings. When she texted incessantly during these outings, I responded once with a simple "having a good time, we'll talk when I get home," then silenced my phone. I reopened the personal banking account I had maintained before our marriage, not to hide money, but to create a financial buffer. A necessity I now recognized after seeing how her mood darkened when I purchased anything without consultation. Each small act of independence was met with escalating tactics, tears, accusations, guilt trips, and of course, the continued intimacy embargo. But something unexpected was happening. With each passing day, her leverage weakened. By removing physical affection as a bargaining chip, she had inadvertently broken its spell over me. The initial frustration gave way to clarity. I realized how much of my behavior had been driven by the desire to maintain her approval, her touch, her validation. Without that reward mechanism, I could finally see the hefty price I'd been paying. 2 weeks into my quiet rebellion, she changed tactics. I came home to find her dressed in provocative attire, candles lit throughout the living room, her demeanor completely transformed. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice honeyed with artificial remorse. "Maybe I overreacted about some things. We don't need to be in this standoff anymore." I recognized the strategy immediately, the carrot after the stick had failed. She was offering a temporary surrender to regain her position of influence. Once I was back under her spell, the conditions and controls would gradually return. "I appreciate the gesture," I said carefully, "but I think we need to address the underlying issues before jumping back into physical intimacy." Her seductive smile faltered. "What issues? I'm trying to move past this." "That's just it," I replied. "Moving past something requires acknowledging it first. We haven't talked about why you felt it was appropriate to use our intimate life as a control mechanism." The mask slipped just for a moment, a flash of cold calculation in her eyes before she recovered. "You're overthinking this. I was upset. I said something I didn't mean. Can't we just forget it?" "Actually, I don't think you said anything you didn't mean," I countered. "I think you expressed exactly how you view our relationship, and that's what we need to discuss." She abruptly stood up, the pretense of reconciliation abandoned. "So now you're a relationship expert, analyzing my words like some therapist?" "No," I said calmly, "just someone who's finally paying attention." That night marked a definitive shift. As she slammed doors and made a show of her indignation, I felt an unfamiliar emotion taking root, not anger or resentment, but something more powerful, indifference. Her approval, her displeasure, her tactical affections, they were losing their hold over me. I fell asleep that night with a realization that would have terrified me just weeks before. I was prepared to lose this marriage, if saving it meant losing myself. The table she thought she controlled was beginning to wobble, its foundation weakened by my quiet but persistent refusal to play by her rules. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning, innocuous yet life-changing. My company's West Coast office needed someone to head their new creative department, a 6-month assignment that could become permanent. The position offered not just a substantial salary increase, but something far more valuable: distance. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. 3,000 miles of separation, a legitimate reason to press the reset button. I forwarded the email to my personal account before she could see it on our shared home computer. That evening, I casually mentioned that something interesting had come up at work, watching her reaction carefully. "The company is expanding the creative team," I said between bites of dinner. "There might be an opportunity for advancement." She nodded encouragingly. "That sounds promising. A promotion would be good for us." Us. Always us. Even when it was clearly about me. "It would mean more responsibility," I continued, deliberately vague. "Longer hours initially." Her smile tightened slightly. "Well, as long as it doesn't affect our home life too much. You know how you get when you're overworked, you withdraw." I withdrew. Interesting perspective on my normal need for occasional solitude. "I'd have to think about whether it's worth the trade-off," I replied noncommittally. I waited until the weekend to reveal the full scope of the opportunity, strategically choosing a public setting, a busy restaurant, where she'd be forced to maintain composure. "So about that work opportunity," I began after our meals arrived. "It's actually in San Francisco." Her fork clattered against the plate. "San Francisco? As in California?" "That's generally where it's located, yes." "You can't possibly be considering moving across the country," she said, her voice low but intense. "It's 6 months initially," I explained calmly. "A trial period for both parties. And what about me? What about our life here? Did you even think about that before getting excited about this?" There, it was not a single question about what this meant for my career, my dreams, my growth. Only how it impacted her plans, her comfort, her control. "Actually, I thought we could both view it as an adventure," I suggested. "You're always talking about wanting to see more of the country." "For vacations, not to live," she hissed. "My entire support system is here. My job, my friends, my routines." "You could take a sabbatical," I offered, "or find temporary work there. Silicon Valley is always hiring marketing professionals." Her eyes narrowed with wrath. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? Making plans that completely upend our lives without even consulting me first." "I'm consulting you now," I said evenly. "The decision deadline isn't for another week." "There is no decision to make," she stated flatly. "We're not going. End of discussion." The old me would have backpedaled immediately. apologized for even considering disrupting her carefully constructed world. Instead, I took a slow sip of water and met her gaze directly. "I haven't decided yet," I said, emphasizing each word. "And when I do, it will be based on what's best for my future." Her expression shifted from anger to disbelief, to something approaching panic. This wasn't just about a job opportunity. It was a fundamental challenge to her authority, a declaration of independence she hadn't anticipated. "If you take that job, I won't come with you," she threatened, her final card played with desperate confidence. I surprised us both with my response. "I understand. That's your choice to make." The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken implications. She had expected her ultimatum to end the discussion. Instead, it had clarified exactly what was at stake. That night, as she slept, I sat in the dim light of my office calculating finances, researching apartments in San Francisco, making lists of what I would take and what I would leave behind. The more concrete the possibility became, the lighter I felt, as if gravity itself had less hold on me. The next morning, my boss called with a timeline acceleration. They needed an answer within 48 hours. "I'll let you know tomorrow," I promised, a strange calm settling over me. After hanging up, I found her waiting in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Who was that?" she demanded. "My boss. They've moved up the decision deadline." She crossed her arms tightly. "And what are you going to tell them?" I looked at the woman I had once structured my entire existence around and felt the last threads of our dysfunctional dynamic finally snap. "I'm going to tell them yes," I said. The words emerged not as a defiant challenge, but as a simple truth. "I'm accepting the position." The table was no longer wobbling. It was about to be flipped entirely. Her reaction wasn't immediate. Instead, she stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disbelief, rage, and something else, fear. The control she thought was unshakable was slipping through her fingers. "You're bluffing," she finally said, her voice unnaturally calm. "You wouldn't throw away our marriage for a job." "I'm not throwing away anything," I replied. "I'm accepting a career opportunity. Whether that ends our marriage is entirely up to you." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "So now I'm the unreasonable one for not wanting to uproot my entire life because you got some wild hair about California?" "No, you're unreasonable for assuming I would automatically decline a life-changing opportunity without discussion, for thinking your comfort automatically outweighs my ambitions, for believing you have veto power over my career decisions." "That's what marriage is," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "Compromise, consideration. Putting the relationship first." "Compromise goes both ways," I countered. "And when was the last time you compromised on anything that mattered? When did you put my needs ahead of your preferences?" She recoiled as if I'd physically struck her. "I've sacrificed everything for this relationship." "Name one thing," I challenged. "One significant sacrifice you've made that wasn't ultimately about maintaining your preferred status quo." Her silence was more revealing than any answer could have been. She paced the living room, recalibrating her approach. "Let's calm down," she said finally, her tone shifting to conciliatory. "We're both saying things we don't mean. Let's take a step back and discuss this rationally tomorrow." It was her standard tactic: delay, defuse, then redirect once emotions had settled. But I was done playing tactical relationship chess. "There's nothing more to discuss," I said firmly. "I've made my decision. I'm moving to San Francisco next month. You're welcome to join me, or not, that's your decision to make." "If you do this," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "there will be no coming back from it. You understand that, right?" I nodded. "I understand completely." "And you're still choosing this job over me? Over everything we've built?" That characterization, that I was choosing a job over her, crystallized exactly what was wrong with our entire relationship. In her mind, any choice that didn't prioritize her was a betrayal. "I'm choosing myself," I clarified, "probably for the first time since we met." Something snapped in her then. She grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase, a wedding gift, and hurled it against the wall. "You selfish bastard," she screamed. "After everything I've done for you." I remained still, refusing to engage with the chaos she was creating. This too was familiar, manufacturing a crisis to distract from the core issue, to recast herself as the victim. "I've managed your life," she continued, tears streaming now. "I've shaped you into something better than you were. Without me, you'd still be that directionless, spineless boy I found." In those few sentences, she revealed more truth than in 5 years of carefully crafted manipulations. She hadn't wanted a partner. She'd wanted a project, a possession, a validation of her own importance. "Thank you for your honesty," I said quietly. "That clarifies a lot." My calm reaction only fueled her fury. She stormed to the dining room and flipped our actual table, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor. "There," she screamed. "Is that what you wanted? Tables flipped? Everything destroyed?" I looked at the overturned furniture, the shattered porcelain, the physical manifestation of her crumbling control, and felt a strange sense of peace. "Sometimes things need to break before they can be rebuilt properly," I said. I walked past her to our bedroom and began packing a suitcase. She followed, alternating between threats and pleas, promises and accusations. I continued methodically, sorting through my belongings, separating what I would need immediately from what could wait. "Where are you going?" she demanded, as I zipped the suitcase closed. "Hotel for tonight," I answered. "I'll make arrangements for the rest of my things later." "You walk out that door and I'll change the locks," she threatened, blocking my path. "That would make it easier to justify breaking the lease," I noted practically. "But it's your call." As I moved toward the door, her final desperate tactic emerged. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, grasping at my clothes. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. We can work through this. I'll go to therapy. I'll be better." For a moment I hesitated, old patterns of responsibility tugging at me. Then I gently disengaged her hands. "I hope you do get help," I said sincerely. "But not for me, for yourself." I walked out the door with nothing but a suitcase and the unbearable lightness of freedom. 6 months passed in a blur of new experiences. San Francisco embraced me with its fog-kissed mornings and vibrant energy so different from the stifling familiarity I'd left behind. My apartment, small but with a view of the bay that still took my breath away, became the first space that was truly mine in years. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Once she realized I wouldn't be manipulated into returning, she took most of the furniture. I took my freedom. Fair exchange. My new position challenged me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Ideas flowed freely without the constant internal editor questioning whether they would meet with approval at home. Colleagues became friends who knew me only as I was now confident, engaged, unburdened by the invisible chains I'd carried for so long. One unusually warm evening, I sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Proud of you, son. You sound happy again." Happy, such a simple word for the complex transformation I'd undergone. It wasn't just happiness. It was authenticity, sovereignty over my own existence, the quiet dignity of making choices without calculating their emotional cost. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. A delivery. The final box of belongings she'd agreed to send after, initially threatening to destroy everything I'd left behind. I placed it unopened in the corner, not yet ready to confront those remnants of my former life. Later that night, curiosity finally won out. I cut through the packing tape and began sorting through the contents. Books, winter clothes, the watch my grandfather had left me. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a framed photo of us on our wedding day. I studied our faces, searching for signs of what was to come. She looked triumphant rather than joyful, I realized now, and my own smile held a trace of uncertainty, as if some part of me already sensed the bargain I was making. I set the photo aside and reached for the final item in the box, a letter in her handwriting. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I still don't understand why you threw everything away," it began. No greeting, no pleasantries, just an accusation masquerading as confusion. "We could have had the perfect life if you just appreciated what I was trying to create for us. Maybe someday you'll realize what you lost and come to your senses. I might even forgive you when that day comes." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. Even now she couldn't see that what I'd thrown away was a beautiful cage, that her vision of perfection required my diminishment. Her forgiveness was yet another attempt at control, dangled like bait to lure me back into orbit around her son. A year ago these words would have wounded me, triggered the guilt and self-doubt she'd so carefully cultivated. Now they simply confirmed that walking away had been the only possible choice. I carried the wedding photo to the kitchen, removed it from its frame and held it over the sink. For a moment I considered setting it aflame, a dramatic gesture of finality. Instead I simply tore it in half, then quarters, then smaller still, until it was nothing but confetti washing down the drain. Some people would call my story a failure, a marriage collapsed, a 5-year investment yielding nothing but painful lessons. But standing in my modest kitchen, watching the physical evidence of my past disappear, I recognized it as something else entirely, a reclamation. That night I met friends for dinner at a local restaurant, people who knew pieces of my story but never defined me by it. As we laughed and shared plans for an upcoming hiking trip, I felt a momentary disorientation, like stepping onto solid ground after months at sea. "You okay?" asked the woman seated beside me, noticing my brief absence. "Better than okay," I replied truthfully, just realizing something. What I'd realized was simple yet profound intimacy. Real intimacy wasn't a bargaining chip to be placed on or removed from tables. It wasn't something to be earned through obedience or withheld as punishment. True intimacy grew from mutual respect, from the freedom to be fully yourself and still be valued. My ex-wife had declared intimacy off the table until I obeyed her. In response, I hadn't just flipped that table. I'd built an entirely new one, sturdy and balanced, with room for people who understood the difference between love and control. As I raised my glass in a toast to future adventures, I silently thanked her for the ultimatum that had finally set me free.